Before the receptionist looked up from her keyboard, before the radiator in the corner clicked on against the November cold, before anyone in the law office understood what was about to walk through the glass door, a woman in a long camel coat stepped inside and asked for the divorce papers in a voice so steady it sounded rehearsed. She had not slept in 2 nights. She had not cried in 12 days. She had practiced the words in the car. And then, as she reached up to unbutton her coat, the man in the waiting room, a man whose name appeared on contracts that moved millions, a man whose silence had built a small empire, slowly stood up. Because he had not known. Because no one had told him she was pregnant. The Hollister Group occupied the 17th floor of a glass tower on Marquette Avenue, a building that had been beautiful in 1987 and was now simply expensive. The lobby downstairs smelled faintly of marble polish and rain. The elevator hummed in a register that made the back of your teeth feel strange. By the time you reached the 17th floor, you understood, without being told, that the people who worked here did not lose. The waiting room was the color of a bruise that had almost finished healing. Soft gray walls, soft gray carpet, 2 leather couches the color of black coffee. A low table with a single orchid that had been placed there by a service that came every Thursday. A wide window faced east, toward the river, and the November light came through it the way light comes through cathedral glass, beautiful, but cold, and somehow further away than it should be. It was the kind of room people walked into already smaller than they'd been in the elevator. The kind of room designed to remind you that whatever you were about to sign would be remembered longer by the building than by you. Adele Vishenko had chosen this firm for one reason, because they had told her on the phone that her husband was already a client and that no one in the office would speak his name to him without her permission. She was 32 years old. She wore the camel coat she had bought 4 winters ago on a trip to Montreal, before her husband had told her the color washed her out. She wore a dark gray sweater underneath it, soft and stretched, the kind a woman wears when she has stopped dressing for anyone but herself. Her hair was the color of black tea, pulled back into a low knot with a clip she had owned since college. She had washed it that morning in the sink of a motel room because the shower drain had been broken and she had not wanted to call the front desk to ask. She was 6 months along. She had only begun to show in the last 3 weeks, and even now, only when she removed her coat. With the coat on, she looked like a woman walking into a meeting. With the coat off, she looked like a woman about to become a mother. Her left hand still wore the wedding ring. She had not taken it off because she had read somewhere that abusers escalate when they see the ring removed, and she had needed 2 more weeks of safety to plan this morning. Today, she would take it off in the conference room after the papers were signed, and she would leave it on the table, and she would never wear it again. She had practiced that too. There was a small folded square in the inside pocket of her coat, smaller than a credit card, soft at the edges from being touched too often. She did not know yet that the man in the waiting room would notice the way her hand kept drifting to her chest, as if checking for a heartbeat that wasn't her own. She had met Roman Vishenko at a charity auction on a Saturday in October 6 years ago, when she was 26, and still believed the world rewarded women who were polite. He had bid on a painting she had been admiring and then handed it to her at the end of the night without explanation, the way a man hands a coat to a coat room attendant, with a small, expectant smile that suggested he had done her a favor she had not yet learned to refuse. She had married him 14 months later in a stone chapel outside Brattleboro. He had worn a charcoal suit. She had worn her grandmother's pearls. The photographer had captured a single image of Adele laughing with her head tilted back, and that photograph now lived in a drawer she had not opened in 2 years because the woman in it did not exist anymore. And looking at her was a kind of grief Adele had not yet found the energy for. The first time he hit her was 19 months into the marriage. He had been drinking dark rum on the back porch of their home in Edgewater Hills, and she had told him, gently, the way she told him everything now, that his mother had called twice, and that perhaps he should call her back. He had stood up. He had crossed the kitchen. He had slapped her so hard she had felt her teeth move. And then he had cried and apologized and told her he had been under pressure and that it would never happen again. It had happened 31 more times. She had counted. She had kept the count in a spiral notebook hidden inside the lining of an old purse at the back of her closet, because if she ever needed to prove to herself that she had not imagined it, the notebook would tell her the truth. She had discovered the pregnancy 5 months ago, on a Tuesday in early June, in the bathroom of a coffee shop 2 blocks from her dentist's office. She had stared at the small plus sign for 9 minutes. She had walked back to her car. She had sat behind the wheel in a parking lot for an hour. And she had decided, sitting there in the heat of a Vermont summer afternoon, that this child would not be born into the house she had been living in. That was the day she began the plan. The receptionist at the front desk was a woman in her 50s named Petra, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the kind of warm, professional smile that had been smiled at thousands of strangers in thousands of bad moments. She did not flinch when Adele gave her name. She did not look at the camel coat. She simply nodded, picked up the phone, and said quietly into the receiver, "Mrs. Vashenko is here for the 10 o'clock. Adele sat down on the couch nearest the window. She placed her purse on her lap. She pressed her palms against the leather on either side of her thighs to keep them from shaking, and she looked out at the river, and she counted backward from 100 in her head, the way she had done every time he had raised his voice, the way she had done every time she had heard the front door open at the wrong hour. 100, 99, 98. The river was iron-colored. A barge moved across it slowly, hauling something she could not identify. She did not know that the man on the other couch was watching her. She had not looked at him when she walked in. She had trained herself, over 6 years, not to look at men in waiting rooms, not to look at men in elevators, not to look at men in grocery store aisles. She had trained herself to look only at the women, because the women were sometimes safe, and the men, even the kind ones, even the ones who meant nothing by it, made her body remember things she did not want to remember. So she did not see him. But she felt him, the way a deer feels a presence at the edge of a clearing without lifting its head. Her hand drifted to her chest. Beneath the wool of the coat, beneath the soft gray sweater, beneath her ribs, the baby moved. A small turning, a stretching, a hello from a country only she could enter. She closed her eyes for half a second and let the feeling pass through her. And when she opened them again, she realized her hand had been resting flat against her stomach, and that anyone watching her would have understood instantly what that meant. She lowered her hand. She did not turn her head. Petra looked up from the desk. "Mrs. Vashenko, Mr. Hollister will see you in conference room 3, just down the hall, last door on your left. Can I take your coat?" Adele stood. She felt the camel wool slide along her shoulders as she began to slip out of it, and she felt, in the same moment, the small folded square in the inside pocket pressing against her chest like a second heart. And she felt the cold of the conference room reaching out down the hallway to meet her, and she felt the weight of 6 years in her knees, and she said, with a small, polite smile that had been polished by 1,000 dinner parties, "Yes, thank you." She handed over the coat. She turned toward the hallway. And as she did, the man on the other couch, a man named Cassian Brevard, the silent partner whose money had built 3 of her husband's businesses, rose to his feet so slowly that no one in the room would have noticed except a woman who had spent 6 years learning to notice exactly that kind of movement. She did not turn around. She walked toward the conference room. Cassian Brevard was 64 years old. He stood 6'2" in dress shoes, with shoulders that had once carried freight at the port of Halifax, and a face that had been arranged, by genetics or by weather or by something else, into the kind of composure that did not change when other men's faces did. His hair was the color of wet slate, cut close, and there was a faded mark along the inside of his right wrist that he had stopped explaining to people sometime in his 30s. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, the color of a sky after a long rain, and they did not blink as often as other people's eyes did. He owned interests in 17 companies across 4 states. He had a name on doors he had never walked through, and a name spoken in rooms he had never entered. The people who needed to know already knew, and the people who didn't were better off remaining in that condition. He had been a silent partner in Roman Vishenko's holding company for 9 years. He had signed documents. He had reviewed quarterlies. He had attended one Christmas party at the Vishenko home in Edgewater Hills 4 winters ago, where he had stood near a bookshelf with a glass of mineral water and watched a woman in a green dress laugh at a joke her husband had made. And he had thought, briefly, that she had a kind face. And then he had forgotten her, the way a man forgets the faces of women who belong to other men. He had not seen her again until this morning. He had come to the Hollister offices to sign off on a real estate transfer, a small piece of paper that would take 12 minutes, after which he had planned to go to lunch. He had not known that Roman Vishenko's wife was filing for divorce. He had not known any of it. And when she had walked through the glass door in her camel coat, he had not recognized her at first, because the woman in the green dress had been laughing, and this woman was not. It was only when she had reached up to unbutton her coat that he had seen. The slight curve, the hand drifting to the chest. The small, unconscious gesture of a woman whose body had begun to belong, in part, to someone else. And then something in Cassian Brevard, something that had been sealed shut for 42 years, had cracked open in the middle of a waiting room with a soft gray carpet, and he had not been ready for it. His mother's name had been Lenore. She had been 23 years old. She had run from a man on a Tuesday in March, in a town in eastern Pennsylvania that no longer existed under that name, and she had been pregnant with Cassian's younger brother, and she had not made it to her cousin's house, and she had died on the side of a state highway in the back of an ambulance that arrived 9 minutes too late. And the brother had died with her. And Cassian, who had been 22 months old and asleep in the back seat of the car, had survived. He had not spoken her name aloud in 30 years. He had built his life, deliberately, around money and silence, and the careful accumulation of leverage, because leverage was the only thing his mother had not had. He had told himself, somewhere along the way, that the boy who had been pulled from the back of that car had grown into a man who could not be hurt, because he had already been hurt as much as a person could be. He had been wrong about that. He understood it now. He understood it standing in the waiting room of a law firm, watching a woman in a camel coat walk down a hallway toward a conference room, with one hand resting against her stomach, as if checking for a heartbeat that wasn't her own. He took out his phone. He sent a message that consisted of 2 words: hold everything. Conference room 3 was smaller than Adele had expected. A long oval table, 8 leather chairs, a wall of windows facing the river, a credenza along the back wall holding a glass pitcher of water and 4 upturned glasses. The lights were softer than the hallway lights. Someone had thought about that. Bram Hollister was already standing when she entered. He was in his late 50s, silver at the temples, with the kind of unhurried posture that came from 30 years of letting other people speak first. He gestured to a chair on the far side of the table, away from the door, and waited until she had sat down before he sat himself. "Mrs. Vishenko," he said, "thank you for coming in. We have everything ready. Before we begin, I want you to know that nothing happens here today that you don't authorize. Nothing leaves this room without your signature." She nodded. He slid a folder across the table. It was thicker than she had expected. She did not open it. She placed both hands flat on top of it, the way one places a hand on a chest to confirm a heartbeat, and she closed her eyes for half a second and she breathed. "There's a problem," she said. Bram waited. "He doesn't know about the baby." The silence that followed was the silence of a man who had heard many things in this room and who had learned not to interrupt the parts of a sentence that mattered most. "And I don't want him to know until the protective order is in place," she continued. "I have been seeing the doctor under my maiden name. The pregnancy is not on any record he has access to. I need you to keep it that way until we are far enough into this that he cannot use it against me." "Mrs. Vishenko," Bram said carefully, "has he ever threatened you in a way that made you fear for the child?" She looked at the river through the window. The barge was gone now. A smaller boat was making its way upstream, slow and steady, against the current. "He has threatened me in every way a man can threaten a woman who is not yet pregnant," she said. "I don't know what he becomes when he learns there is something else to take from him. I am not interested in finding out." Bram nodded slowly. He picked up his pen. He made a small notation on a yellow legal pad. Then there was a soft knock at the door. Petra opened it without waiting for a response, which meant the person on the other side had authority she did not need to confirm. "Mr. Hollister, Mr. Brevard is asking for 10 minutes of your time. He says it concerns Mrs. Vishenko's matter." Adele's hand went to her chest before she could stop it. Bram looked at her. He did not move from his chair. "Mrs. Vishenko, this is your meeting. Mr. Brevard is a long-standing client of this firm, and he is, as I understand it, also a business associate of your husband. You have every right to refuse this conversation. What would you like me to tell him?" She did not know who Cassian Brevard was. She had heard the name twice in 6 years. Roman had spoken it once at a dinner, in a tone of voice that had told her he did not like the man, which had also told her something about the man. Roman did not dislike people who could not threaten him. She did not know why this stranger was asking to see her. She did not know what he had seen, but she had spent 6 years learning to read the air in a room. And the air in this room had changed the moment Petra had said his name. "I'll give him 5 minutes," she said. Bram looked at her for a long moment. "I will be in the room with you. He will sit on the opposite side of the table by the door. If at any point you want this to end, you say the word coffee. Just that one word, and I will end it." "Coffee," she repeated. He nodded to Petra. Petra closed the door and a moment later opened it again, and Cassian Brevard walked in. He did not look at her at first. He looked at Bram. He looked at the table. He looked at the chair he had been gestured toward, and he sat in it without removing his coat, the way a man sits when he does not intend to stay long enough to settle. Then he looked at Adele, and she saw his face fully for the first time, and she understood, in the small and terrible way women in her situation always understood, that she had nothing to fear from this man. She did not know why. She had simply spent 6 years cataloging the faces of dangerous men, and his face was not one of them. His face was a man who had walked into a room expecting to do business and had found a wound he had not known he was still carrying. "Mrs. Vishenko," he said. His voice was quieter than she had expected from a man his size. "I have 9 minutes before my next appointment. I am going to use them to say 3 things, and then I am going to leave. And you can decide whether you ever want to speak to me again. Is that acceptable?" She nodded. "First, I have been a partner in your husband's holding company for 9 years. I did not know what kind of man he was at home. I should have known. I had information available to me that I chose not to look at, because looking at it would have required me to do something about it, and I had decided long ago that there were certain things in the world I was not going to look at. That was a coward's decision. I am telling you so that you know exactly what I am, before I offer you anything." Adele did not move. Her hand had stopped drifting to her chest. It was resting on the folder now, palm down. "Second, I have resources, legal, financial, residential, and otherwise. I am offering them to you in whatever combination you choose. You may choose all of them. You may choose none of them. You may choose them today and decline them tomorrow. There are no conditions. There is no expectation. There is no part of this offer that requires you to be grateful or to ever speak to me again after today. And third, he said, and here his voice changed, only the way a stone changes when water has been moving over it for a very long time. I had a mother once. She was 23 years old. She was carrying my brother. She ran from a man on a Tuesday in March. She did not make it to where she was going. Nobody helped her on the road. Nobody had been watching her closely enough to know she was running. I have spent 42 years learning how to make sure I never have to be that kind of nobody again. And this morning, in your waiting room, I realized I had never actually been tested on it. He stood up. He placed a small white card on the table, a single number, no name. You don't have to call, he said. He turned and he walked out of the room, and the door closed behind him with a soft, deliberate click that nobody in the room had been expecting to feel as much as they did. Adele did not pick up the card. She sat in the leather chair with both hands flat on the folder, and she breathed, and she counted backward from 100, and she got to 94 before she realized she was not counting because she was afraid. She was counting because she did not know what to do with what had just happened. She had walked into this room expecting a transaction. She had not expected a stranger to leave a piece of his own grief on the table in front of her. Bram waited. He was very good at waiting. After a long moment, she said quietly, "Do you trust him?" Bram considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I have known Cassian Brevard for 16 years, he said. I have seen him do many things. I have never seen him do anything dishonest. He is, in my professional opinion, one of the most contained men in this city. What I just watched happen in this room is something I have never seen him do before, in any setting, with any client. I cannot tell you what it means. I can only tell you that I have never seen it before." She looked at the card. It was sitting on the polished wood like a small, white, impossible thing. "I would like to take a few minutes," she said. "Take the morning. Take the afternoon. I will keep this room for as long as you need it. I will be at my desk. When you are ready, come and find me, and we will continue." He stood, and he left, and the door closed behind him, and Adele Vashenko sat alone in a conference room on the 17th floor of a glass building, and she allowed herself, finally, to feel something other than the carefully managed steadiness she had practiced in the car. She reached into the inside pocket of her coat, which had been hung on a hook by the door, and she took out the small folded square, and she unfolded it on the table. It was an ultrasound photograph, black and white. A small curled shape in a small dark sea. Her own handwriting in the margin. October 14th. 22 weeks. She is healthy. She was a girl. Adele had known since the 20-week scan. She had not told anyone. She had not picked a name. She had been afraid that picking a name would make it real in a way she was not yet allowed to make real, because the moment a child has a name, you understand that you would die for her, and Adele had understood for a long time that she might be asked to. She placed the photograph on the table next to the white card. She looked at them both for a long time. She thought about the man with the pale blue eyes who had said his mother had not made it. She thought about a woman she had never met, 23 years old on the side of a state highway in Pennsylvania, with a child inside her who would never be born. She thought about the man she herself had run from. She thought about how a man who had survived being 2 years old in the back of a car had walked into her morning and offered her something she did not yet know how to receive. She picked up the card. She picked up her phone. She dialed the number. It rang once. "Brevard." "This is Adele Vashenko," she said. Her voice was steady. She did not know how. "I have not decided anything. I am calling because you said I didn't have to. I wanted to find out if that was true." There was a silence on the other end. Not a long silence. A measured one. "It was true," Cassian said. It is still true. You can hang up right now and nothing changes about what I offered. But if you would like to talk for a few minutes, I can be in the lobby of your building in 12. She closed her eyes. Yes, she said. Please. She did not know, when she hung up the phone, that Cassian Brevard had already pulled his car to the side of the road. She did not know that he had been driving in the general direction of nowhere, the way a man drives when he does not yet know whether the call he is hoping for will come. She only knew that she had said please, and that the word had cost her nothing, and that this fact alone should have been unremarkable, and was not. The lobby coffee shop on the ground floor of the Hollister building was a small glass-walled place called Marlowe and Finch. Adele sat at a corner table near the window. She had ordered tea she did not intend to drink. Bram had come down with her and sat at a table near the door, reading a folded newspaper, close enough to hear the word coffee, if it was said. Cassian arrived at 11:12. He was carrying nothing. He sat down across from her and placed his hands on the table where she could see them, and he did not speak first. She looked at him for a long moment. "Why my husband's company?" she asked. "If you knew enough to know what kind of man he was, why did you stay in?" "I did not stay, because I did not know," he said. "I stayed because I did not look. There is a difference. The first is ignorance. The second is something worse." "Why didn't you look?" He thought about the question. He did not rush. "Because every time I looked at a man who hit his wife," he said, "I saw the man my mother had run from. And every time I saw that man, I had to ask myself what I was going to do about him. I had decided, somewhere around the age of 30, that I was willing to be a man who made money and kept his hands clean and did not interfere in other people's marriages. It was a comfortable position. It allowed me to sleep at night. And it required, as its only price, that I never looked directly at any of the women whose husbands looked the way he had looked." He paused. "I looked at you this morning," he said, "and I understood in about 4 seconds that the price had been higher than I had been willing to admit. For 42 years. Adele did not speak for a long time. "I am going to ask you something," she said finally. "And I want you to tell me the truth. Because if you lie to me now, I will know, and I will leave. All right? Are you helping me because you want to be a different man than you were yesterday? Or are you helping me because you actually see me?" Cassian considered her across the small table. "Both," he said. "I will not lie to you. It is both. And I think it has to be both. Or it doesn't work. A man who only wants to fix himself will use you to do it. A man who only sees you will not have the strength to act. I am trying to be both. And I am trying to be honest with you about which is which. And I am asking you to let me be useful to you on those terms, or to send me away on those terms. Either is acceptable." She looked at him across the table. She nodded once. "All right," she said. "Then let me tell you what I need." She told him about the house in Edgewater Hills and the way Roman tracked the GPS on her car. She told him about the joint accounts that had been frozen on her side 6 months ago, after she had asked a question about a missing $12,000. She told him about the prenuptial agreement that had a clause she had not understood at 26. She told him about her sister in Asheville who would not return her calls because Roman had told the sister, 3 years ago, that Adele was struggling with substances, which was a lie that had been carefully constructed to make her unwelcome in the only home she had left. Cassian listened without writing anything down. He had a memory built for this. He had spent 40 years training himself to hold information without recording it, because written records could be taken from a man, and what he held in his head could not. When she was finished, he said, "How long do you have?" "I told him I was going to my doctor this morning. He thinks I'll be home by 2. "Then we have 3 hours. What do you need first?" She looked at him. The question was strange. Nobody had asked her what she needed first in 6 years. The question of what she needed, of what came first, had not been hers to answer in a long time. I need somewhere to sleep tonight that he cannot find. Done. I need a doctor. The baby needs a doctor I can keep seeing under a name he doesn't know. Done. I need a lawyer who is not afraid of him. You have one upstairs. He is one of the best in the state. I will retain him on your behalf this afternoon, with money that has nothing to do with your husband's holdings. The retainer will be irrevocable. It will cover everything Bram does for you for the next 2 years, no matter what you decide about anything else. She blinked. I haven't agreed. You don't have to. I am telling you what I am doing. You can fire him tomorrow. The retainer will still be irrevocable. The money is gone the moment I send it. That is the point. It cannot be taken back. By you or by me or by anyone. Which means he cannot threaten me into withdrawing it, and he cannot threaten you into refusing it. It is a closed door. Your husband cannot open it. Neither can I. She looked at him. Why are you doing it that way? Because I have spent 42 years learning how men like your husband apply pressure. The only thing that defeats pressure is closure. A door that cannot be reopened. Money that cannot be reclaimed. A decision that cannot be unmade. I will give you many of those today, if you let me. She felt something in her chest that she did not have a word for. It was not relief. Relief was too small. It was closer to the feeling of standing in a doorway during a thunderstorm and realizing, after a very long time, that the roof above you is not the one you have been carrying on your shoulders. She nodded. He took out his phone. He made 3 calls. They were short. He did not raise his voice on any of them. The first was to a woman named Sister Imelda, who ran a small private medical practice in the basement of a community center in the city's West End, where she saw patients who could not be on insurance rolls for reasons she did not require them to explain. The second was to a man named Theron, who managed a small block of furnished apartments on the north side that did not appear in any listing service and were rented only by referral. The third was to a woman named Mara Quincy, an attorney who specialized in civil protection orders and who had a working relationship with 3 judges in 2 counties and who would consider it a personal kindness to be allowed to work on Adele's case. When he hung up, he said, "The doctor will see you at 4. The apartment is yours starting tonight. The lawyer will meet you at 8 in the morning. What about my things at the house? What is in the house that you cannot replace?" She thought about it. She thought about her grandmother's pearls. She thought about a small wooden box on the top shelf of the bedroom closet that contained her mother's letters from college, and a single silver locket and a ribbon from a day in 2009 that had been the happiest of her life. "A wooden box," she said, "on the top shelf of the bedroom closet. It is not heavy. It will fit inside a grocery bag." "What time does he leave the house tomorrow?" 7:40. He goes to a gym on Caldwell Avenue. He is there until 9. At 7:45 tomorrow morning, 2 men will enter your house. They will not break anything. They will not take anything except the box. They will be in and out in less than 4 minutes. The box will be at your apartment by 9:30. Is that acceptable? How will they get in? You will give me your key. I will return it to you in the apartment tomorrow morning. She thought about Roman walking back into the house at 9:15 and noticing that one small wooden box was missing from a closet he never opened. She thought about him not noticing. She thought about him calling her phone, which she would not be answering by then, because the number would no longer exist. "All right," she said. "There is one more thing," Cassian said. He said it carefully. "I am not going to lie to you about what I do. I have means that are not always conventional. I will not use them on your behalf without your permission. But I want you to know they exist, so that when something happens that you do not understand, you understand it came from me. The kinds of things that might happen are these. Your husband may receive a phone call this week from a man whose name he will recognize, asking him to consider very carefully how he proceeds with the divorce. He may discover, in the next 30 days, that certain doors have closed in his business that used to be open. He may find, eventually, that the city is smaller than he thought it was. None of that will involve you. None of it will be illegal. All of it will be visible to him only as a kind of weather. She looked at him for a long time. Do it, she said. All of it. Cassian nodded once, and then his face changed in a way that surprised her. It softened. Not visibly, not in any way another man at another table would have caught. But she was not another man, and she caught it. He looked for a moment like a boy who had been told he was finally allowed to do something he had wanted to do for a very long time. Then it begins today, he said. The apartment was on the 8th floor of a building that did not have a name on the outside. The doorman was a tall, soft-voiced man named Ozias, who did not ask Adele for an ID when she arrived at 6:40 in the evening, because he had been told by Theron that no ID would be required. He simply handed her a key, walked her to the elevator, and pressed the button for the 8th floor with the polite, unobtrusive grace of a man who had spent his career making strangers feel safe in hallways. The apartment had been prepared. A small living room with a soft blue couch, a kitchen with a kettle already on the counter, a bedroom with a low bed made up in white sheets, a bathroom with new towels still wearing their tags. On the kitchen table was a paper bag from a grocery store, holding bread and cheese and apples and a small carton of orange juice and a bar of dark chocolate, and a folded note that read, in neat handwriting that was not Cassian's, "Welcome. There is a list of numbers on the fridge. Use any of them." Adele stood in the middle of the living room for a long moment. She put down her purse. She put down the small overnight bag she had been keeping in the trunk of her car for 9 days. She walked into the bedroom, sat down on the edge of the white bed, and pressed both palms against her face, and she did not cry, because she had forgotten how to start, and because some part of her was still waiting for the door to open behind her, and for a voice to ask her where she had been. The door did not open. After a long time, she lay down on her side, on top of the white bedspread, with her shoes still on, and she put one hand on her stomach, and she said, very quietly, into the soft, empty air of an apartment that nobody knew she was in, "Hello, baby, we're home." She fell asleep with her hand still there. She woke at 5:12 in the morning. The room was gray. She did not at first remember where she was, and then she did. And the remembering did not bring fear with it the way it had every morning for 6 years. It brought something else, something quieter, something she did not yet have a word for. She made tea in the unfamiliar kitchen. She stood at the window and watched the lights of the city begin to come on. She thought about Roman waking up alone in the house in Edgewater Hills, and then she stopped thinking about him, because he was a man in a house she no longer lived in, and she was a woman in a kitchen he could not find. At 7:45, 2 men entered the house in Edgewater Hills. They did not break anything. They took the wooden box from the top shelf of the bedroom closet, and they took also, at Cassian's quiet instruction, one item Adele had not asked for, a framed photograph of her mother that had been hanging in the hallway, which Cassian had remembered her mentioning in a single sentence the night before. They left no other trace. They were out of the house in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The box arrived at Adele's apartment at 9:18, carried up by Ozias himself, who simply placed the bag on the threshold and stepped back. Adele opened the box on the kitchen table. The pearls were inside. The letters were inside. The locket was inside. The ribbon was inside. The framed photograph of her mother lay beside the box, wrapped in a soft cloth she did not recognize, and when she unwrapped it and saw her mother's face, she sat down in a kitchen chair and cried for the first time in 12 days. She cried for her mother, who had died when Adele was 19 and would never have met the granddaughter who was coming. She cried for the green dress she had worn at a Christmas party 4 winters ago. She cried for the version of herself that had counted bruises in a notebook in a closet, and for the version of herself that had walked into a bathroom 5 months ago and stared at a small plus sign for 9 minutes, and for the version of herself that was sitting at this table on this morning with a wooden box in front of her, and a baby growing inside her, and an apartment that locked from the inside. She cried until her breath caught, and then she breathed again, and she put the photograph on the kitchen counter where the morning light could reach it. Mara Quincy arrived at 8 o'clock the following morning carrying a leather portfolio and 2 cups of coffee, one of which she set in front of Adele without asking how she took it. Mara was 51, broad-shouldered, with iron-colored hair in a short cut, and the kind of voice that had argued in front of judges so many times it no longer needed to be raised to be heard. "Mrs. Vashenko," she said, "I am going to tell you what is going to happen in the next 96 hours. I am going to file an emergency protective order this afternoon, based on the documentation Mr. Hollister has already gathered and the photographs your physician took yesterday. I expect the order to be granted within 24 hours. Your husband will be served at his office on Friday. I will also file, simultaneously, a motion for emergency temporary custody of your daughter once she is born, on the grounds of documented domestic violence, and the pattern of coercive control I have already begun to assemble. By the time your daughter is born, the legal architecture of her safety will be more solid than the foundation of the building you are sitting in. Do you understand me?" Adele nodded. She could not yet speak. "There is one more thing," Mara said. "Your sister in Asheville, the one who stopped returning your calls." "Yes. I have a colleague in Asheville, a retired federal investigator who consults on domestic violence cases. She will, this afternoon, sit down with your sister and explain to her, with documentation, what was actually happening to you over the last 6 years. Your sister deserves to hear it from someone who is not you. With your permission, I would like to make this happen." Adele looked at her across the table. "Yes," Adele said. "Please, do it today." Mara made a single note on her yellow pad, and then she looked up, and her face changed. The lawyer dropped, just for a moment, and a woman appeared underneath it. "Mrs. Vashenko," she said quietly, "I have done this work for 26 years. I want you to know something that I do not say often. You did the thing that most women in your position do not get to do. You walked in. You did not run. You did not hide. You walked into a law office on a Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock with your spine straight and a child inside you, and you said, 'I am ending this.' That takes a kind of courage I have rarely seen. Everything I do for you, from this moment forward, will be in honor of the fact that you did not have to be saved. You saved yourself. The rest of us are simply catching up." Adele put her hand over her mouth. She did not cry. This was a different feeling. This was the feeling of being seen by another woman who had spent her career seeing women like her, and the feeling carried a weight that was not grief and was not joy and was something older than both. She nodded. Mara reached across the table and squeezed her hand once, briefly, professionally, and let go. "Then let's begin," she said. The weeks that followed moved with the steady, deliberate rhythm of dominoes that had been carefully placed. The protective order was granted on Thursday. Roman Vashenko was served on Friday at his office on Whitcomb Street, in front of 2 of his junior partners, and Mara was told later that he had not raised his voice, which was the most dangerous thing he had ever not done. He hired a lawyer. The lawyer hired a private investigator. The investigator was unable to determine where Adele was living, and after 17 days of unsuccessful searching, was paid in full and quietly let go, because the money funding the search had begun to encounter the same kind of weather that other parts of Roman Vashenko's life had begun to encounter. The custody motion was granted on the 3rd Tuesday in December. By Christmas, Roman had agreed, through counsel, to terms his lawyer had described to him in private as the most that could be salvaged. By February, the divorce was final. By March, the financial settlement had been concluded, and Adele had received exactly what she was entitled to, and not $1 less, because Mara Quincy had built a foundation that did not allow for anything less, and because certain phone calls had been made, and certain doors had quietly closed in certain rooms in the city, and Roman Vishenko had decided, somewhere in the long gray middle of January, that he would prefer to keep the doors that remained open than to spend any more of his energy on the woman who was no longer his. He did not know that Cassian Brevard had been part of any of it. He suspected. He never asked. The baby was born on a Sunday in March, at 4:12 in the morning, in a small private hospital in the city's East End. She weighed 6 pounds, 11 ounces. She had her grandmother's mouth and her mother's hair and her own particular eyes, which were a color the nurses said would change, but which Adele suspected would not. She was named Ilana Vishenko, after Adele's mother, whose framed photograph had been moved from the kitchen counter to the bedroom dresser, where it would be the first face Ilana saw every morning of her life. Sister Imelda delivered her. Mara Quincy arrived at the hospital with a small bouquet of yellow tulips at 6 in the morning and stayed for an hour. Adele's sister flew in from Asheville on Tuesday, having not seen Adele in 3 years, and she walked into the hospital room, and she looked at the baby, and she looked at Adele, and she sat down on the edge of the bed and said, "I am so sorry. I did not know." And Adele said, "I know you didn't. I know." And the two of them held each other in a hospital bed with a sleeping infant between them, and a wound that had been 3 years wide began, slowly, to close. Cassian Brevard sent flowers. He did not visit. He had said nothing to her in the 11 weeks since the divorce had been finalized, because he had decided that the most useful thing he could be in Adele's life going forward was someone she was not required to think about. He had spent his career understanding leverage. He understood that gratitude was a kind of leverage too, and that the cleanest kind of help was the kind that did not generate any. But on the Sunday morning Ilana was born, he had been sitting in a coffee shop on the other side of the city, and his phone had buzzed with a single text from Mara Quincy that read, "Mother and baby healthy," and Cassian Brevard had set down his coffee and put his face in his hands for a moment. And Ozias the doorman, who happened to be in the same coffee shop on his morning off, had looked the other way out of professional courtesy, and so nobody had seen the small, controlled break of a man who had been waiting 42 years to know that a particular kind of story did not have to end the way his mother's had. In May, Adele moved out of the apartment without a name and into a small house on a quiet street on the city's north side with a yard the size of a postage stamp and a maple tree that had begun to leaf out in tiny green hands. The house was hers. Bram had handled the closing. The mortgage was in her name alone. She painted the baby's room a pale yellow, the color of butter left out on a windowsill in summer. She hung the framed photograph of her mother on the wall above the changing table. She bought a rocking chair at an estate sale in a town an hour north of the city, and she carried it home in the back of her own car, and she sat in it every evening with Ilana on her chest, and she sang to her the songs her own mother had sung to her, and she did not know all the words to any of them, and it did not matter, because Ilana did not yet know that there were words at all. On a Tuesday in late June, Adele pushed Ilana in a stroller through a small park near her new house. The morning was warm. The maples had finished leafing. A woman jogged past with a golden retriever. Adele sat down on a bench of her own, in the dappled light under a tree whose name she did not know, and she watched her daughter sleep, and she felt, for the first time in 7 years, something she had thought she had lost the capacity for. She felt unwatched. Not in the way of a woman who is alone, in the way of a woman who is no longer being hunted. The two are not the same. One is loneliness. The other is something very close to grace. Cassian Brevard sat in his car at the far end of the parking lot, in a dark sedan with the engine off, and he watched her through the windshield from a distance of perhaps 100 yards. He could not see Alana. He could see only the curve of a stroller and the back of Adele's head, and one hand resting on the side of the bench in a posture of complete stillness. He had not planned to be there. He had been driving home from a meeting, and he had passed the park, and he had pulled in without thinking. He had told himself when he parked that he would simply make sure she was all right, and then he would leave. He had been telling himself that for 10 minutes. He thought about his mother. He thought about the highway in Pennsylvania. He thought about the boy in the back seat who had grown into a man who had never been able to say her name aloud. And he thought that the boy had finally been allowed to do something he had wanted to do for 42 years. He had not undone any of it. The highway was still the highway. His mother was still gone. His brother was still gone. But somewhere on the other side of the parking lot, a woman in a blue sweater was sitting on a bench with a sleeping baby beside her, and she was unwatched, and she was unhunted, and she was the mother of a daughter who would grow up in a yellow room with a maple tree outside the window and a grandmother's photograph above the changing table. Cassian put his hand on the gear shift. He looked at her one more time. He whispered very quietly into the empty car, the name he had not said aloud in 30 years. Lenore. Then he put the car in drive, and he pulled out of the parking lot, and he turned right onto the road, and he did not look in the rearview mirror, because looking in the rearview mirror was for men who needed to confirm what they had done, and Cassian Brevard had no need to confirm anything. The boy in the back seat had been allowed, finally, to climb out of the car. And somewhere on a quiet street on the north side of the city, in a small house with a yellow room and a maple tree, a baby slept the deep, unguarded sleep of a child who had never once, in the whole of her short life, heard a raised voice in a room she belonged to. Not yesterday, not today, not ever.